You think you can put your filthy hands on my future mother-in-law? You worthless Puerto Rican trash. Serena Castellano's voice, usually modulated to a honeyed sweetness for public consumption, sliced through the quiet afternoon like a rusty blade. Isa Navarro, only 27 but already carrying the steely composure of someone who had survived far worse battles in the world's forgotten corners, was crouched low. Her arms were wrapped protectively around the frail, shaking frame of Rosa Moretti. The 75-year-old woman trembled violently, her wide eyes glazed with pure terror, still struggling with the physical devastation of a stroke that had stolen half her words and all her mobility 3 months prior. Serena's designer stiletto, a lethal point of black leather, connected with Isa's ribs in a vicious, targeted kick. Isa bit back a cry. "Get your hands off her, you meddling piece of garbage." Serena hissed the command, the venom in her tone coating every syllable like acid. Isa gasped through the blinding, sudden pain. "Please stop. She's hurting. Please don't hurt her anymore. She's your fiancé's mother. Think of her heart. She can't take this stress." But Serena only laughed, a brittle, abrasive sound like shards of glass scraping across marble. She snatched a heavy crystal vase from the edge of the antique mahogany table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the gilded wall, exploding into 100 glittering fragments, missing Isa's head by mere inches. Isa flinched instinctively, but her hold on Rosa remained iron-tight. "Mrs. Moretti," she whispered urgently against the woman's silver hair. "I've got you. Breathe. Please just breathe." From the shadow of the arched doorway leading into the foyer, a voice cut through the chaos, low, controlled, and intensely dangerous. "What the hell is going on here?" Dante Moretti stood framed in the entrance. At 63, he was immaculate, dressed in a bespoke black three-piece suit that cost more than Isa's entire life savings. His steel-gray eyes, eyes that had seen and ordered the darkest of deeds, swept the scene. His mother, utterly broken, cowering. His fiancée, Serena, trembling theatrically, tears already pricking the corners of her carefully applied makeup, and the Puerto Rican caregiver, kneeling on the expensive Persian rug, arms locked around Rosa like a shield. Serena whirled toward him, her face instantly drained of color, but her eyes, moments later, glittered with ice-cold calculation. "Dante, thank God you're here. I tried to stop her, but she pushed your mother. She wouldn't let go. I couldn't pull her off." "That's not true." Isa's voice came out, surprisingly steady despite the throbbing pain in her side. She looked up, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears, meeting Dante's unforgiving gaze directly. "I was trying to protect her. She was about to." "Shut your mouth," Serena shrieked, instantly shattering her fragile damsel act. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Isa. "You think you can just waltz in here and play hero? You think anyone in this house is going to believe you over me?" She spun back to Dante, her voice mastering a perfect, wounded quiver. "She's dangerous, Dante. Look at her. Look at my arm." She clutched her own elbow, though not a single mark, scratch, or imperfection existed on her flawless skin. Dante's jaw tightened, becoming a hard line of granite. He took a single, slow step closer, his eyes fixed on Isa like a predator assessing a struggling prey. "Step away from my mother." Isa's heart plummeted, dropping into her stomach like a stone. "Sir, please listen to me," she pleaded, refusing to move until she had a moment to explain. "Step away." Dante's voice cracked like a whip across the vast space, sharp enough to cut steel and silence. Serena let out a long, shuddering exhale, as if relieved of a tremendous weight. "Thank you. Finally." "She terrified me." Isa gently shifted Rosa against the armrest of the ornate velvet chair, her hands trembling now not from fear of Serena, but from the fear of abandoning the woman she had sworn to care for. "Mrs. Moretti needs a doctor. Please, don't you see? I trusted you." Dante muttered the words, more to the opulent silence of the room than to Isa. Rosa, silent and ashen, reached a shaking hand out toward Isa, a desperate, mute plea. But Dante didn't see. He only saw the shattered vase and the hysterical fiancée. "You're fired," he said flatly, the sentence delivered with the chilling efficiency of a death sentence. "Pack your things and leave now." Essay's lips parted, a breath of protest, a defense of the truth, rising up her throat. But she swallowed it down. She had seen this power dynamic play out before, in the harsh world she had clawed her way out of. When truth collided with supreme power, power always spoke louder. She rose slowly, pushing herself upright despite the stabbing pain in her side, and straightened her simple white uniform with quiet dignity. "I was only trying to help," she whispered, the words barely audible in the suddenly massive room. Serena stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low, intimate tone that was razor-sharp. "Get out before I have Dante's men drag you out. You've caused enough trouble here." Essay glanced one last time at Rose's stricken, terrified face, then lifted her eyes to Dante's, cold, unforgiving, and utterly closed off. "Please," she said softly, her final plea for the old woman. "Don't leave her alone with this woman again." No one answered. She turned and walked out, past Serena's triumphant smirk, past the marble foyer where the shattered crystal glinted like broken promises. Outside, the sky had darkened, and a cold, steady, relentless rain began to fall. Her old, battered Honda Civic waited at the end of the impossibly long, circular driveway. Isa gripped her cheap canvas bag tighter and kept walking, her back straight and unwavering, even as she felt her heart crack into 1,000 irreparable pieces inside her chest. Behind her, in the intimidating shadow of the Moretti mansion, the only person who had truly protected Rosa was disappearing into the escalating storm, carrying the heavy weight of a crime she never committed. If you want to see how Dante discovered the devastating truth, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who loves justice and drama, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the Mafia boss finally learns he destroyed the only person who truly loved his mother. The rain still would not stop, falling in thick sheets, when Isa's old Honda Civic turned into a deserted gas station on the desolate outskirts of Chicago. She shut off the engine, the sudden silence of the car total and suffocating. She sat in the dark, the only sound the steady, mournful tapping of the rain on the roof of the car. A sad, endless song. Isa pulled her uniform shirt up carefully and looked at the angry, purple-red bruise already spreading along her side where Serena's high heel had landed. The pain throbbed in slow, measured waves, but it was a distant distraction compared to the hollow, aching emptiness inside her chest. She closed her eyes, and the image of Mrs. Rosa rose up, sharp and undeniable. 2 weeks earlier, on a sunny morning, the older woman had slipped a slender silver bracelet off her own frail wrist and placed it into Essay's palm with a gentle, knowing smile. "You have a rare heart, my girl. Do not let anyone, take that from you." Essay remembered refusing, saying she was not worthy of a gift so beautiful and precious. But Mrs. Rosa had tightened her grip around Essay's hand, her voice trembling slightly yet firm with absolute resolve. "It is precisely because you think you are not worthy that you are more worthy than anyone I have ever known." Isa opened her eyes, reached into the pocket of her soaking uniform trousers, and drew out the bracelet. It was icy cold in her palm, yet somehow, holding it still gave her a faint, almost illusory warmth. She clenched it tightly, as if she were holding the last, fragile thread connecting her to the woman she had sworn an unspoken vow to protect. Where was Mrs. Rosa now? Was she all right? Was Serena doing something to her in her absence? The questions spiraled relentlessly through Isa's mind like a Category 5 cyclone. But she knew she was utterly powerless. She had been ejected. She had no rights, no access, no claim left to that world. Isa took out her phone and scrolled through a contact list that was heartbreakingly sparse, almost empty. She had only one true friend, Carmen, her supportive roommate back during their chaotic nursing school days. She pressed call. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Then it clicked to voicemail. "This is Carmen. I can't answer right now. Leave a message." Isa did not leave a message. What would she even say? That she had just lost her hard-won job for trying to protect an old woman? That she was sitting in her car in the relentless rain, suddenly jobless, shelterless, and having nowhere to go? Not knowing what to do, she tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, rested her forehead against the cool plastic of the steering wheel, and for the first time since leaving the gilded cage of the Moretti mansion, she allowed herself to cry. The tears fell in quiet, steady streams, blending invisibly with the torrent of rain outside. An hour later, numb and exhausted, Ayase found a cheap motel on the absolute edge of the city limits. $45 a night, cash only, no questions asked. The kind of place where discretion was the only amenity. The room was tiny, smelling heavily of dampness and ancient, stale carpet, but at least it had a bed and a roof. Ayase lay down, fully clothed, and stared up at the ceiling, blotched ugly with past water stains. The bruise at her side flared into sharp, hot pain each time she drew a necessary breath. She thought about her life. Orphaned at 8 years old, raised in the temporary, emotionally barren houses of the foster care system, often neglected, starved, treated as if she did not deserve to exist. But she had survived. She had taught herself, pulled herself up by sheer force of will, and built a decent life with her own 2 hands. And then, just when she thought she had finally found a place where she could offer true help, just when she thought she had done the definitively right thing, everything had collapsed again. Doing the right thing, Ayase whispered into the oppressive darkness of the motel room, is never rewarded. She closed her eyes and drew in a long, deep, painful breath. But if I could live it again, I would do the exact same thing. Because Ayase Navarro was not the kind of person who would abandon an old woman to be beaten or terrorized, even if it meant paying the price with everything she had fought for. She was on the very verge of falling into a shallow sleep when her phone buzzed softly on the seat beside her. Ayase opened her eyes and reached for it immediately. A text message from an unknown number. She frowned and opened the notification. Thank you for protecting her. Someone is watching. Do not give up. Ayase sat up fast, the pain in her ribs momentarily forgotten, her heart tripping violently over itself. Who had sent this message? How did they know, within an hour, exactly what had happened inside the Moretti mansion? What did the phrase "someone is watching" truly mean? She stared at the screen, questions spinning through her head like a cyclone, but no answers materialized. Only the heavy, soaked Chicago night beyond the window, and a small, fragile spark of hope, newly and miraculously lit in the pervasive dark. Who had sent that mysterious message? At that exact same time, back at the Moretti mansion, a dense, oppressive darkness had settled into every corner of the vast master bedroom suite. Rosa Moretti lay motionless on the cavernous king-size bed, her eyes wide open, fixed on the elaborately decorated ceiling above her. This was the first night without Ayase at her side, and the room had never felt so cold, so hostile. She tried desperately to move her lips, tried to force shattered, coherent sounds out of her throat. No, not her. Her voice was only a thin, fragile whisper, the agonizing aftermath of the stroke that had stolen half of her language 3 months ago. But her mind was still fiercely clear. She remembered everything. She remembered Serena slapping her, kicking her feet, threatening her. She remembered Ayase rushing in like an angel of mercy, using her own young body as a shield. And she remembered her son, Dante, driving away the only person who had truly protected her. The soft, deliberate sound of the door opening made Rosa flinch uncontrollably. Serena stepped inside, her movement smooth and predatory, like a cat stalking helpless prey. She closed the heavy door behind her, and in an instant, the sweet, vulnerable smile she had worn all day for Dante vanished without a trace. Her face turned instantly cold, her eyes sharp as honed blades. "Hello, Rosa," Serena said, her voice stripped of all sweetness, revealing a harsh, metallic core. "I hope you sleep well. That Puerto Rican girl is not here to bother you anymore." Rosa tried to turn her head away, unwilling to look at the tormentor, but Serena would not allow the defiance. She walked to the bedside and leaned down, her face only inches from Rosa's. "You know, None of this had to happen, Serena whispered, her tone dripping with intense bitterness. All you had to do was sign those papers, transfer the property rights to me like we agreed months ago. But no, you had to be stubborn. You had to refuse. And now look at the consequence. Rosa's eyes widened, and she strained with every ounce of physical energy she had left to speak. My son. Will what? Serena cut in, sneering mercilessly. Believe you? An old woman who has had a stroke, who can barely speak clearly, whose mind is obviously confused. She straightened up slowly and folded her arms across her chest in a gesture of absolute authority. Dante loves me. Dante trusts me. He just fired that little maid without a second thought. Didn't he? Do you really think he would ever believe your confused ramblings over me? Rosa felt hot tears surge up. She reached a shaking hand toward the small silver bell on the nightstand. The bell placed there so she could summon help whenever she needed it. But Serena was impossibly faster. She snatched the bell off the table and hurled it into the far corner of the expansive room, where it landed with a muffled clang and silence. Do not even think about calling anyone, Serena hissed, her eyes blazing with raw rage. Listen to me, old woman. One word to Dante, just one word, and I will make sure he thinks you have completely lost your mind. I will put you in a nursing home, lock you away in a tiny, supervised room, and you will never see your son again. Who is going to believe a stroke patient over his loving fiancé? Rosa lay perfectly still, tears sliding down her wrinkled cheeks and dampening the pillow. She was utterly powerless. She could not speak. She could not protect herself. And the only person who had protected her had been violently thrown out. Be good, Serena said, the malice instantly masked by a false, chilling sweetness as she stroked Rosa's silver hair as if she were petting a harmless animal. Soon, I will be the mistress of this house, and then you will truly learn how to behave. Serena turned and walked out, closing the heavy door softly behind her. The sound of her sharp heels faded down the long hallway. Rosa lay there in the dark, her tears falling without end. She prayed for someone, anyone, to see the truth, prayed for Isa to be safe wherever she was, and prayed for her son, Dante, to wake up before it was too late. Unbeknownst to anyone, in the corner of the room, cleverly hidden behind an old, heavy painting, a tiny security camera was still quietly recording. It was the camera Rosa had secretly asked Marco to install months before she had the stroke, when she had first begun to suspect the true, toxic nature lurking behind Serena's pretty facade. No one knew it existed, not even Serena, and it had captured absolutely everything. Rosa's secret camera had recorded it all. But would anyone ever find it? In the dim, cavernous office downstairs, Dante Moretti sat alone in his leather chair. The third glass of amber whiskey was heavy and cold in his hand. The single light from the desk lamp cast deep, sharp shadows across his angular features, illuminating the steel-gray eyes fixed on nothing at all. The room was suffocatingly quiet, broken only by the methodical tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. He lifted the glass to his lips, letting the expensive liquid slide down his throat. But not even the smoothest, most expensive whiskey could drive away the persistent image that kept looping through his mind. The eyes of that Puerto Rican girl, Isa Navarro. Dark brown, rimmed with the shine of unshed tears, and yet never begging. Eyes that had met his with an expression that was not fear, but profound disappointment. And her last words before she turned and walked away. Please do not leave her alone with that woman again. Dante clenched his jaw, trying to forcibly shove the memory into the deep recesses of his mind. She was only a maid, a caregiver. She had no right to speak about Serena, his fiancée, that way. Serena was the daughter of Don Castellano. This marriage was pivotal. It would strengthen the alliance between the two powerful families, creating the strongest combined force in the entire Chicago syndicate. He could not, he told himself fiercely, allow an unknown, disposable nurse to ruin all of it. A low, respectful knock at the door pulled Dante out of his spiraling thoughts. Come in, he said, his voice instantly rough and businesslike. Marco Vital stepped inside, the tall, broad frame of the 40-year-old man filling the doorway. Marco was Dante's right hand, his consigliere, the man who had served the Moretti family faithfully for 20 years, since Dante's father was still alive. If there was one person in this world Dante trusted completely besides his own mother, it was Marco. "Boss, I have the report on this week's shipment," Marco said, setting a thick file neatly on the corner of the desk. But Dante did not look at the file. He looked at Marco and suddenly asked a question that startled them both. "That girl, Fiancée Navarro, what do you know about her?" Marco hesitated, a flicker of profound unease passing through his dark eyes. "She has worked here for 6 months, boss, taking care of Mrs. Rosa. I have nothing to complain about with her performance." "Not that," Dante cut in, his tone impatient. "Today, what did you see before I came home?" Silence stretched tautly between them. Marco looked down, then up again, his face tight with reluctant hesitation. "Boss, I'm not sure I should say." "Say it." I saw something before you got back." Marco drew a deep, visible breath. "Miss Castellano," she was shouting at your mother. "I did not see clearly what happened next, but she was very loud, very aggressive." Dante set the whiskey glass down on the desk with a sharp sound, harder than he meant to. "Serena is my fiancée. This marriage will strengthen the alliance with the Castellano family. Do you understand what that means, Marco?" "I understand, boss." "Then do not question her again. Do you understand?" Marco lowered his head slightly, but his eyes did not look convinced. "Yes, boss. I only wanted you to know what I saw." He left the file and walked out, leaving Dante alone once more with his tightly tangled thoughts. Dante sat for a while longer, the cold whiskey still untouched. Then he stood. He needed to see his mother. He needed to be sure she was all right. He went up the grand stairs in silence, his footsteps quiet by long habit, the careful movement of a man long accustomed to navigating the darkness. Rosa's bedroom was bathed in the soft, intimate glow of a single bedside lamp. He pushed the heavy door open and looked in. His mother was sleeping, or at least she looked as if she were sleeping. Her face was calm, her breathing even. Dante felt a wave of relief physically loosen the tightness in his shoulders. He turned to leave, then stopped abruptly. Something made him look back. His mother's wrist. Dante stepped closer and bent down, his formidable silhouette blocking the bedside lamp, and he saw it clearly. A bruise, fresh, distinct, and darkly purple, on the inside of Rosa's wrist. That placement could not have been caused by a protective embrace. If Fiancée had been holding his mother to shield her, as she claimed, the bruises would have been on the shoulder or the back, in the places where two bodies were pressed together. But this was the wrist, the soft, vulnerable inside of the wrist, as if someone had grabbed hard, tightly, and yanked violently. Dante stood frozen, staring at the evidence of the bruise. In his mind, the violent afternoon replayed itself in slow, agonizing motion. Serena crying, pointing at Fiancée. Fiancée kneeling, holding his mother. His mother reaching toward Fiancée as if she did not want her to go. Please do not leave her alone with that woman again. For the first time, the monolithic wall of trust Dante had painstakingly built around Serena showed a small, undeniable crack. And he knew, with the cold certainty of a man who dealt in betrayals and consequences, that once a crack appeared in something fundamental, it would never heal on its own. Dante began to doubt. But was it already too late to correct his fatal mistake? The next morning, Dante could not sleep. The image of the bruise on his mother's wrist haunted him all night, twisting in his mind like a devastating question with no obvious answer. He sat rigid in his office while the sky was still an icy dark gray, waiting for the only man he truly trusted. At exactly 7 a.m., Marco knocked and stepped in, as he did every day. But today, Dante did not ask about business, shipments, or rival families. He rose slowly, walked to the vast window overlooking the drive, and kept his back to Marco. "I need you to do something," Dante said, his voice low and utterly unhurried. "Find out everything about Fiancée Navarro. Her background, her family history, her past, her previous work. Everything. Marco nodded once without asking the obvious question of why. But Dante was not finished. And watched Serena secretly. I want to know what she does, who she meets, who she talks to when I am not with her. Every single detail. This time, Marco could not hide his profound surprise. Boss, do you suspect her? Dante turned, his gray eyes colder than steel on a winter morning. I suspect everyone, Marco. That is why I am still alive. Marco understood the profound wisdom and the harsh necessity of the words. In the Mafia world, blind trust was always the shortest, fastest road to death. He lowered his head and silently left the room, beginning his perilous new assignment. At that same hour, upstairs, Serena stood in the marble bathroom with the heavy door locked tight, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was tense, almost a desperate hiss through her teeth. That old woman almost ruined everything. If that Puerto Rican girl hadn't been thrown out immediately, our entire plan would have been finished. The person on the other end said something, and Serena's face tightened with impatience. I know, but you have to understand, she still won't sign those papers. I need her to sign before the wedding. If not, once I officially become Mrs. Moretti, everything will become infinitely more complicated. She paused, listening intently, then nodded, even though the other person could not possibly see her. Let me handle it. I have already hired a new nurse. She will know how to deal with this problem. Serena ended the call, looked into the large, ornate mirror and smiled. A smile as cold and flawless as cut glass. Just as Serena had promised, the new nurse arrived mid-morning. Bethany was a middle-aged woman, her face set hard as currency, without a hint of natural warmth in her cold, dark eyes. She had been hired personally and exclusively by Serena, and from the first moment, the way she treated Rosa made it brutally clear she was not a caregiver, but a paid guard. Eat, Bethany snapped harshly, shoving the food tray toward Rosa with unnecessary force. I do not have all day to sit here. Rosa turned her face away sharply, her lips pressed tight into a determined line. She refused to eat, refused to take her unnecessary medicine, refused to cooperate in any way with this frightening, unfamiliar woman. Inside her, there was only one name, the name she had tried desperately to form all night long. *ISA. Where was the girl now? Was she safe? Why had her powerful son driven away the only person who truly loved her? At noon, Dante purposely passed by his mother's room. He stopped when he saw Serena sitting at Rosa's bedside, holding her hand gently, her voice sweet as the finest honey. Mother, I am so sorry about yesterday. I was so frightened that I terribly overreacted. I promise I will take very good care of you from now on. You are my future mother-in-law after all. Dante stood silently in the doorway, watching the perfect, convincing performance. Serena looked up, met his eyes, and offered the gentlest, most vulnerable smile she could possibly manage. She stood, stepped out, and kissed Dante lightly on the cheek. I am trying to make Mother feel more comfortable, she said, her voice dropping slightly, overlaid with a manufactured layer of warmth. I know she does not like me, but I will not give up. I will earn her trust eventually. Dante nodded curtly, saying nothing, his expression betraying no thought. Serena offered a practiced, confident smile, then turned and walked down the long marbled hallway, her expensive heels tapping out a sharp, steady rhythm that diminished with each measured step. He watched the sway of her figure until she rounded the far corner, then immediately looked back into his mother's room, the previous tension returning. Rosa lay there, still and silent, her eyes shut as if she were lost in deep sleep. Dante let out a slow, heavy breath, already turning to leave, resigning himself to the night's quiet defeat. And that was when he heard it. A small sound, thin and weak, yet heartbreakingly clear in the sterile quiet. Dante froze mid-pivot. He spun back, his gaze snapping into the darkness of the room. His mother was still lying there, her eyes still closed, but her lips were moving, struggling against the paralysis to shape the sound. Is-la. It was the first word Rosa had managed to say, the first coherent syllable spoken since the massive stroke had ravaged her body 3 months ago. And the name she called was not Dante. It was not Serena. It was Isla, the girl he had driven away from his home and his family only days before. Dante's heart felt like it was being physically crushed in a fist, the pain spreading through his chest. Why? Why was the first word his mother fought so desperately to speak the name of the person he had publicly accused and disgraced? Why was she not calling him her son, but calling her? The agonizing questions tore through Dante's mind like a sudden, violent storm, and the seed of doubt he had carelessly planted the night before was now beginning to sprout roots, tenacious and cold. Rosa had finally found her voice, and she was calling the name of the woman Dante had unjustly thrown out. 3 long, arduous days passed. 3 days of Dante observing Serena from a clinical distance, tracking every affected gesture, every fleeting glance, every sweet, careful word that left her mouth. 3 days of him going up to his mother's silent room each night, watching her sleep, watching the stubborn, deep bruise on her fragile wrist slowly shift its ugly color from an angry purple toward a sickly yellow. 3 days of him waiting for Marco, his most trusted investigator, to finish the assignment that now felt impossibly critical. And today Marco came. The loyal man stepped into Dante's spacious, darkly paneled office, a thick, utilitarian file folder held tightly in his hand. He set the file on the massive mahogany desk without a single word and simply stood there, waiting for the command he knew was coming. Dante looked first at the file, then up at Marco's steady, impassive face. "Is this everything?" Marco nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Everything I could find about Isla Navarro, boss, and a few other things I think you should know." Dante reached out, his fingers cold, and opened the file. He began to read, the details stark and unsettling against the clean white paper. Isla Navarro, born in 1997 in the Bronx, New York. Mother, Maria Navarro, Puerto Rican, worked cleaning houses. Father unknown. And then the next line, rendered in sterile black print, made Dante stop breathing entirely. Maria Navarro died in 2005. Cause, traumatic brain injury due to domestic violence. Perpetrator, Richard Cole, stepfather. Isla Navarro, 8 years old at the time, was the only witness. Dante felt his throat tighten, as if the air in the expensive room had suddenly turned thick and heavy. He forced himself to keep reading. After her mother's death, Isla was placed immediately into the foster care system. The child lived with 7 different families over the next 10 years. In the records of one of those homes, there was a brief, chilling note about Isla being disciplined excessively. A cruelly gentle phrase for sustained abuse. But the girl did not break. Isla studied on her own at night, relying on borrowed library books, and worked part-time during the day to survive. At 18, she aged out of foster care and began a difficult independent life. At 22, she earned her nursing degree, and from there, she began working at the utilitarian St. Mary nursing home. Dante turned the page, the sound loud in the quiet office. Isla's work record at St. Mary's spanned over 5 years. Not a single complaint, not one negative report. Instead, there were 8 separate letters of glowing praise from patients' families. One particular note made Dante slow down, forcing him to read the words again more carefully. In 2022, the family of a patient who passed away offered Isla a total of $10,000 to thank her for caring for their mother in her final, painful days. Isla refused. She stated that she did not do this job for money, but because she did not want anyone to be alone in their last moments, the way her mother once was. Dante closed the file, the sound a quiet snap in the silence, and sat unmoving for a long time. For an orphaned girl, raised in the crushing cycle of poverty and violence, $10,000 was not just a sum. It was a fortune. But she refused. Because she had principles. Because she had a heart. Marco spoke, the soft sound of his voice breaking the stillness. "She is clean, boss. Cleaner than anyone I have ever investigated. Not a single dark mark in her past. Just a girl trying desperately to live decently, even though life itself was never decent to her." Dante said nothing. He only stared sightlessly at the wall opposite him, his thoughts spinning and colliding like debris caught in a powerful current. Marco placed another, much thinner, sheet of paper on the desk, sliding it across the polished surface. "And this is the information on Miss Castellano. As you requested." Dante picked it up. It was physically much thinner than Isla's file, but what it contained felt infinitely heavier. Over the past 2 years, Serena had fired 3 maids from her wealthy household. One of them claimed that Serena had physically struck her, but there was not enough evidence to take the matter to court. The powerful Castellano family, Marco's notes stated, paid a large, untraceable amount of money to keep that person quiet. There were also consistent, simmering rumors about Serena treating badly the people she considered inferior to her station. But no one had ever dared to say it out loud, paralyzed by fear of the Castellano family's immense power and reach. Dante set the paper down, both hands tightening into hard, painful fists on the desk's edge. He had trusted a woman with a history of striking defenseless servants, and he had violently thrown out a woman who had devoted her entire life to caring for others. He had chosen wrong, completely, irrevocably wrong. "Where is she?" Dante asked, his voice rough, thick with suppressed violence. "Isla. Where is she now?" Marco looked at him, a faint sense of professional relief flickering momentarily in his eyes. "St. Mary Nursing Home, boss." She went straight back to her old job. Dante stood abruptly, walked to the tall window, and looked out at Chicago's cold, gray sky, the city looking distant and uncaring. He needed to find Isla. He needed to apologize, to beg forgiveness, to know the truth. But first he needed proof. Undeniable, definitive proof of what Serena had done. Dante had finally begun to see who Isla truly was. Would he find her before it was too late? The St. Mary Nursing Home sat deep in the isolated suburbs of Chicago. It was an aging, dilapidated building with peeling paint and long, cavernous corridors that seemed to stretch into nowhere. There were no marble floors here, no glistening crystal chandeliers, no million-dollar paintings adorning the walls. There was only the sharp, persistent smell of disinfectant, the steady, rhythmic beep of necessary medical machines, and the quiet presence of human beings waiting, resignedly, for the final day of their lives. Isla had come back here, to the place where she worked for 5 long years before she was hired into the deceptive luxury of the Moretti mansion. The work was as punishing as ever. 12-hour shifts, pay not even reaching $20 an hour, and as many as 15 vulnerable patients to care for each day. But Isla did not complain. She never had. That afternoon, Isla sat quietly beside the bed of Margaret, an 80-year-old woman with white silver hair pulled into a neat braid and pale blue eyes clouded by age and illness. Margaret suffered from severe Alzheimer's. She barely remembered anything. Not her own children, certainly not her grandchildren. But she liked having her hair brushed, and she liked listening to Isla sing. "Sing that one," Margaret whispered, her voice trembling slightly with effort. "The one your mother used to sing." Isla smiled gently, even though Margaret was not her mother, and even though Margaret did not truly know who Isla was. Isla drew the comb through the woman's fragile, thin hair and began to sing. It was a Spanish lullaby, the very song her mother had sung to her every night before she died. "Duerme, mi niño." Isla's voice was soft and clear, spreading through the small, sterile room, filling it with unexpected warmth. Margaret closed her eyes, a peaceful, momentary smile settling on her lips. And in that moment, Isla did not see Margaret anymore. She saw Rosa, Mrs. Rosa, with her kind, expressive eyes, her warm, generous smile, the faint pressure of the silver bracelet she had gifted Isla. Mrs. Rosa, the woman Isla had sworn a silent oath to protect, only to be forced to abandon. Tears rose quickly in Isla's eyes, hot and sharp, but she swallowed them down, forcefully. She could not cry, not in front of a patient. "You sing beautifully." The voice, cold and deep, made Isla go instantly still. She knew that voice. She would never, ever forget that voice. She turned her head slowly, her heart seeming to stop entirely in her chest. Dante Moretti stood framed in the doorway, alone. No bodyguards, no sign of a weapon, none of the usual, intimidating force that seemed to follow him like an oppressive shadow. He wore a simple, tailored black coat, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his piercing gray eyes fixed on her with a look she found utterly unreadable. Isla's instincts snapped fiercely awake. She stood up immediately and moved to place herself physically between Dante and Margaret, a thin, resolute shield. She positioned herself as if he were an immediate, tangible threat, as if she would protect this elderly woman at any cost, even though she was only a thin nurse and he was the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. "What are you doing here?" Isla asked, her voice calmer and steadier than she expected it to be. Dante stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, sealing them into the small, confined space. "My mother said your name." Isla said nothing, only watched him, her dark eyes defiant. "It was the first word she has been able to say since the stroke," Dante went on, his voice low, deliberate, and tinged with something like self-loathing. "Why would my mother call your name?" "Because I was the only one protecting her," Isla answered instantly, without flinching or hesitation. Dante took another slow, heavy step closer. "Protecting her from whom?" Isla looked straight into his cold gray eyes, not blinking, not allowing herself to shake. "You know from whom. You just do not want to believe it." A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the room. Dante did not speak, but his jaw was clenched so hard the muscles jumped beneath the skin, his face tight and rigid. He was fighting fiercely with himself. Isla could clearly see that. "Tell me," Dante said at last, his tone almost an order, sharp and demanding. "Tell me exactly what happened that day." And Isla told him. She told him about hearing the sharp, terrified screaming echoing from Rose's room. She told him what she saw the instant she flung the door open. Serena slapping Rose's face, screaming venomous threats at her, forcing her frail body to sign a stack of papers. She told him how Serena violently kicked Rosa to the floor when she refused to cooperate. And she told him how she had thrown herself in, using her own body as a shield, taking the kicks, the slaps, the stream of hateful insults Serena hurled at her. She wanted Mrs. Rosa to sign papers transferring the property. Isla whispered, her voice trembling slightly now with renewed anger as the horrific memories flooded back. Mrs. Rosa refused, and Serena punished her for it. Right in front of me, Dante stood as still and hard as polished stone. Not a single muscle in his face moved, holding a terrifying control. But his eyes, those cold gray eyes, were full of a brewing, dangerous storm. "If you are lying to me," Dante said slowly, each word measured and low as if he were barely holding himself back, "I will make sure you never work anywhere again." Isla did not step back. She met his powerful gaze, her dark brown eyes lit fiercely with pride and integrity. "And if I am telling the truth, then what?" Dante did not answer. He only stood there, looking at her for one long, agonizing moment, then turned sharply and walked out of the room. The door shut heavily behind him. Isla watched him leave and realized something crucial. Dante's footsteps, as he retreated down the long hallway, sounded far heavier than they had when he arrived. Dante had heard the truth, but believing it would mean accepting that his entire world was built upon a lie. Dante drove back to the Moretti mansion in absolute, deafening silence. Isla's accusing words echoed through his mind the entire way, like a relentless song he could not turn off. "You know from whom. You just do not want to believe it." He needed proof. He needed to see the undeniable evidence with his own eyes, and he knew exactly where to start looking. The security control room sat deep in the basement of the mansion, a small, windowless room crowded with banks of monitors and recording equipment. Every corner of the massive house was watched 24 hours a day. Every second, every minute stored away on servers, or at least it was supposed to be. Dante walked in, and the guard sitting hunched at the console startled violently to his feet. "Boss, I did not know you were coming down here." "Sit," Dante ordered, his voice dangerously cold and flat. "I need to see the footage from my mother's room. That day, the day the nurse was fired." The guard swallowed hard, his face tightening with sudden, obvious tension. He sat down slowly, typed a few commands on the keyboard, opened the relevant storage folder, and then he stopped, his fingers hovering above the keys. Boss, there is a problem. Dante looked at the screen. The folder for that specific day was empty. Not a single file remained. Where is the footage? Dante asked, his voice sinking to a dangerous whisper that chilled the guard more than a shout. Deleted, boss. Who deleted it? The guard lowered his gaze, unable to meet Dante's terrifying eyes. Miss Castellano. Boss. She came down here that very night and told me to delete all the footage from the day. She said there was a technical issue. The image was distorted. It did not need to be saved. Dante stood still, perfectly motionless. His jaw clenched so hard it felt like his teeth might grind to dust. Serena had deleted the footage that same night, hours before anyone could possibly see it. Why? Why would she delete it if there was truly nothing to hide? If Isla truly had attacked Rosa the way Serena claimed, the footage would have been the perfect, undeniable proof. Serena should have kept it, shown it to Dante, shown it to the police if necessary. But she deleted it. She had erased the evidence. The fragile doubt inside Dante was no longer doubt. It was becoming something far more terrifying and concrete, a certainty taking horrifying shape. He left the security room without a single word, climbed the stairs with heavy steps, and headed straight for his mother's room. It was well past midnight, but when Dante pushed open Rosa's door, she was awake. Her eyes were wide and strangely bright in the darkness, fixed on the doorway as if she had been waiting for someone specific. When she saw her son, Rosa did not speak, only looked at him with an aching gaze, full of words she could not force from her throat. Dante walked to the bedside and sat down, gently taking his mother's thin, cold hand. He could feel her trembling, not from cold, but from something deeper, fear and pain. Mother, Dante said softly, his voice thick with rising emotion. I need you to tell me the truth. What happened that day? Did Serena do anything to you? Rosa looked at her son, and 2 tears finally spilled over, tracing tracks down her wrinkled cheeks. She tried again to open her mouth, tried to force broken sounds out of her throat. Dante felt his heart clamp agonizingly tight as if a fist had closed around it. His mother was trying to confirm that Serena had hit her. Mother, I am so sorry, Dante whispered, his head bowed. I did not believe you. I threw out the only person protecting you. I am sorry. Rosa shook her head weakly, dismissing the apology, and then she did something that startled Dante. She lifted her hand, the trembling one, and pointed urgently toward the corner of the room, behind the old painting on the wall. Dante frowned, not understanding the urgency, but Rosa kept pointing, her eyes steady and filled with insistence. He stood, crossed immediately to the corner, and lifted the heavy painting away from the wall. And he saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible camera hidden so cleverly no one could have found it unless they already knew it was there. Dante turned back to his mother, his eyes wide with shocked realization. Mother, you installed this? Rosa nodded slowly, a faint, proud smile flickering across her lips. She had known. She had suspected Serena for a long time, even before the stroke, and she had meticulously prepared. Dante called Marco immediately. In less than 15 minutes, Marco was back, breathless. He expertly removed the tiny camera, connected it to a laptop, and efficiently found the specific file from that day. Yes, boss, Marco said, his voice trembling slightly with professional excitement and relief. It is here. It is all here. Dante sat down, staring at the black screen of the laptop. Marco handed him a small USB drive containing the raw footage. Dante took it and realized his hand was shaking violently. This was the moment of truth. This was the moment he would know whether he had been terribly right or catastrophically wrong. This was the moment he would finally see the real face of the woman he intended to marry. Play it, Dante ordered, his voice rough and strained. Marco pressed the button. The screen lit up. The secret camera, positioned high and unseen, had captured everything, and Dante was about to witness the horrific, undeniable truth. The screen lit up, and hell opened in front of Dante. The image from the hidden camera was razor-sharp, down to every heartbreaking detail. Rosa's bright bedroom, afternoon light spilling through the window, and Serena Castellano standing in the middle of the room, her face twisted with a deep, ugly rage. Nothing like the gentle, sweet woman Dante thought he knew. "Sign here, you senile old hag." Serena's voice in the video rang out, sharp and cruel as a blade, utterly devoid of warmth. "Sign or I will turn your life into a living hell." Rosa sat hunched on the bed, shaking her head weakly, her lips moving as she tried desperately to say something, but no sound came. She was fighting back, refusing. Even though her body was frail and her voice had been stolen by the stroke, she resisted. And then Serena slapped her. Serena's hand swung up and crashed down across Rosa's fragile cheek with terrifying, brutal force. The 75-year-old woman's head snapped violently to the side, a raw, inarticulate cry of pain tearing out of her throat. Dante felt his blood turn instantly to fire, but the video kept going, and it grew worse. "Who do you think you are?" Serena screamed, grabbing the collar of Rosa's nightgown and yanking her forward, leaning into her face. "You think you can stop me? I am going to be the mistress of this house. And you? You will die alone in some rotten nursing home that no one even remembers." She shoved Rosa with extreme violence. The old, weakened woman fell heavily to the hardwood floor. The sound of impact was sharp enough to physically hurt Dante's ears. Serena laughed. A cold, sickening sound, standing over her victim like a victor over the defeated. And then the door flew open. Isla ran in, her eyes wide with horror at what she saw. She did not hesitate, did not think. She rushed straight to Rosa, dropped instantly to her knees, and used her own body to shield the fallen woman. "Do not touch her," Isla shouted, her voice shaking with fear but full of resolute, pure resolve. Serena spun around, her eyes blazing with murderous fury. "You dare interfere in my business, you cheap Puerto Rican trash." She lunged and kicked Isla hard in the side. 1 kick, 2 kicks, 3 kicks. Isla folded inward with the pain, a choked gasp escaping her, but she did not let go of Rosa. She wrapped herself tighter around the older woman, letting her own back and ribs take every brutal blow. Serena snatched up the crystal vase from the bedside table and hurled it violently at them. It shattered against the wall just above their heads, fragments exploding outward and raining down. "Let her go!" Serena screamed, spittle flying. "Let go now." But Isla did not let go. She only held Rosa tighter, whispering urgent reassurance into her ear. "I am here. I will not let anyone hurt you. Breathe. Just breathe." And then, in the video, heavy footsteps sounded from the hallway. Dante's footsteps. Serena heard them, and in a single terrifying instant, her face changed completely. The viciousness vanished, replaced by instantaneous fear, worry, and tears spilling perfectly as if someone had flipped a hidden switch. She stepped quickly back, clutching her own elbow as if she were the injured one. And when Dante appeared in the doorway, she had fully transformed into the perfect victim. "Dante, I tried to stop her, but she pushed your mother." The video ended. The screen went dark, plunging the room back into the heavy silence of the present. Dante sat unmoving, his face white and hard as a corpse. He said nothing, did not breathe, did not move. Marco stood beside him, equally still, not daring to speak. Rosa lay on the bed, quiet tears slipping quietly down her wrinkled cheeks. She had waited for this moment, the moment her son would finally see the absolute truth. 1 minute passed, 2. Then Dante stood slowly, rising like a beast waking from a deep, bloody sleep. And then he exploded. He flung the laptop off the table with unimaginable force, and it slammed into the far wall with a brutal, ear-splitting crash. He swept his arm across the shelves, knocking everything down. Books, framed photographs, expensive decorations. All of it clattering onto the floor in a terrible avalanche of destruction. He punched the wall once, twice, 3 times, until warm blood began to seep quickly from his broken knuckles. "I threw her out," Dante roared, his voice raw with a deep, agonizing pain that sounded like someone was physically ripping his insides apart. I threw out the only person protecting my mother. I believed the one who was hurting her. He dropped to his knees in the wreckage, both hands savagely clutching his head. Dante Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, the man the entire underworld feared, was on his knees, his shoulders shaking in uneven, gut-wrenching waves. Marco stepped forward and laid a hand gently on his shoulder, without a word. There were moments when silence, heavy and shared, was the only possible response. Rosa watched her son, her heart aching deeply for his pain. She wanted to reach out, wanted to hold him, wanted to say she forgave him entirely. But she knew Dante needed this moment of absolute reckoning. He needed to face the full weight of his mistake before he could begin to fix it. At last, Dante rose. He drew in a deep, shuddering breath, dragged a bloody hand down his face, and when he turned to Marco, the gray in his eyes was no longer pain. It was cold, dangerous, and terrifying, the calculated look of a mafia boss about to deliver final, brutal judgment. "Prepare for tomorrow night," Dante said, his calmness frightening in its stark control. "Arrange a dinner. Invite Don Castellano and his family. Tell them it is a party to announce the wedding date." Marco nodded, his features tightening with the understanding of the calculated execution required, and immediately went to contact Father Antonio. "I need him there as a witness, a very specific witness." "Yes, boss." Dante looked toward his mother, his eyes softening for a fleeting heartbeat, an expression only she would ever see. "I will fix everything, mother. I swear it will be done." Rosa nodded, a faint, almost serene smile touching her lips. For the first time in weeks, she felt the warmth of true hope. Dante finally possessed the complete truth, and the boss of the Moretti family was now poised to carry out his cold, decisive judgment. The following night, the Moretti mansion blazed with light, the glow spilling out onto the manicured grounds as if welcoming the most triumphant of celebrations. The main dining room had been meticulously dressed in a splendor bordering on fatal opulence, adorned with mounds of blood-red roses, shimmering white candles, and the most precious, intricate silver dinner service the family had ever owned. Servants moved in quick, silent motion, the private chef preparing a feast of the most expensive and traditional Italian dishes. Everything was perfect, perfect in a way that felt utterly and frighteningly staged. Serena Castellano descended the grand staircase in a brilliant, form-fitting scarlet gown that clung to her body, showcasing every strategic, seductive curve. She had spent the entire day at a private spa, luxuriating in preparation. Her hair professionally styled, her makeup perfected, all ready for what she truly believed would be the most glorious night of her life. The night Dante would announce their wedding date in front of both crime families. The night she would officially secure her destiny as the future Mrs. Moretti. "You look stunning," Dante said as she reached the bottom step, his tone unervingly calm, almost flat. Serena beamed, kissing his cheek with a bright, possessive energy. "Of course, Dante. This is our special night." She did not notice that Dante's gray eyes, fixed upon her, were colder than the glacial ice of the Alps. She was too absorbed in admiring the lavish splendor around her, too deep in her own triumphant fantasy, to realize she was confidently stepping into a well-laid trap. The guests arrived one by one. Don Castellano, Serena's father, a 60-year-old man whose salt and pepper hair and impeccably tailored suit spoke of authority, his eyes sharp with the calculated ruthlessness of a seasoned mafia boss. Beside him was Vincent, Serena's brother, a 35-year-old man with a cold, perpetually quiet presence. They entered the mansion with the imposing posture of honored guests, entirely unaware they were stepping into a public trial. "Dante, you have truly gone all out," Don Castellano said, gripping Dante's hand in a firm, confident shake. "I am guessing this is a special occasion indeed." "Very special," Dante replied, his lips pulling into a smile that failed to reach the icy depths of his eyes. "I have something profoundly important to share with everyone tonight." Serena linked her arm possessively through her father's, guiding him toward the dining room, laughing brightly and speaking of her impending happiness. She was at the peak of her delusion, unaware that this was the absolute last moment of that manufactured joy. Rosa was brought down in her wheelchair, Bethany gently pushing her into the dining room. But tonight, there was an unmistakable difference in the old woman's eyes. There was no trace of fear, no hint of despair. Instead, her gaze glittered with an ancient, knowing light as she looked at her son, as if she held a secret knowledge that the others, especially the Castellanos, did not possess. Serena noticed Rosa, and her lips curved into a practiced, sickeningly false smile. "Mother, you look much better. I hope you will enjoy dinner tonight." Rosa offered no answer, only looking at Serena with an intensity that, had Serena been intelligent enough, she would have recognized as the gaze of the executioner who already knew the final score. And then another guest appeared. Father Antonio, the elderly, stoic priest from the church the Moretti family had been tied to for generations. He walked into the dining room in his traditional black robe, his face kind yet bearing the weight of stern moral authority. Serena frowned in momentary surprise. "Father Antonio, I did not know you were invited." "I invited Father as a witness," Dante said gently, his voice carrying just enough to cut through the hum of conversation. "For an important event." Serena nodded, dismissing the suspicion. She assumed Dante wanted Father Antonio to witness the announcement of the wedding date, perhaps to immediately discuss the formalities of the church ceremony. She could not possibly fathom the horrific, public truth that awaited her. Dinner began. The meticulously prepared appetizers were served. Fine wine was poured into shimmering, full glasses. Everyone conversed and laughed. The atmosphere seemed artificially warm and sickeningly cheerful. Serena spoke without pausing about her extravagant wedding plans. The couture bridal gown she had ordered from Paris, the endless, exclusive guest list, the grand ceremony she had dreamed of for years. "I want it at St. Patrick's," Serena gushed, her eyes shining with avarice and excitement. "It is the most beautiful church in Chicago, and the reception will be at the Peninsula Hotel. I have already put down the deposit." She turned to Dante, expecting his immediate, loving agreement, but Dante offered nothing. Throughout the entire course of the meal, he barely opened his mouth. He simply sat there, his cold gray eyes never leaving Serena, watching her every movement, cataloging every expression. That gaze was distant, unervingly cold, as if he were observing a specimen under glass. Don Castellano finally noticed Dante's unusual, profound silence. He slowly set his wine glass down, the movement sharp and deliberate, and studied his future son-in-law with mounting curiosity. "You have been remarkably quiet all night, Dante. Is something concerning you?" Dante placed his napkin on the table slowly, deliberately, the sound crisp in the suddenly hushed room. Then he stood, his large frame commanding the attention of everyone present. "Actually, yes," Dante said, his composure almost unnatural, chilling. "I have something I want everyone here to see." He signaled Marco, who stood like a shadow in the corner of the room. Marco nodded, walked to the nearest wall panel, and pressed a control button. A large projection screen slowly, silently lowered from the ceiling, covering the ornate far wall. It was a professional presentation screen Dante had arranged to have installed earlier that day, hidden until this calculated moment. Serena looked at it, confused, her voice bright with forced excitement. "What surprise are you preparing for me, Dante? Is it a video montage of our trip to Europe, or is it?" Dante did not answer. He only looked at her, and in that instant, Serena finally caught the true light in his eyes. Something in that look, something cold, vast, and deadly, made the smile on her lips falter and die. It was the gaze of a predator poised for the fatal strike. Marco pressed play. The large screen instantly lit up, and Serena's forced smile froze on her face as she realized it was not a sentimental montage. It was footage, clear, undeniable footage, from Rosa's private bedroom. The trap had finally sprung shut. Serena was about to face her devastating judgment in front of both powerful families. The video began to play, and the luxurious dining room instantly transformed into a silent, terrible courtroom. On the large screen, Serena Castellano appeared, her face twisted with a hideous fury, a completely different person from the elegant, glittering woman seated at the table. "Sign here, you senile old hag. Sign or I will turn your life into a living hell." Serena's voice in the video rang out, icy, brutal, and ruthless. Everyone in the room jerked their attention to the screen, then to Serena, then back to the screen again, as if doubting the evidence of their own sight. Don Castellano set his wine glass down. His gaze locked on the image of his daughter raising her hand and savagely slapping the face of a frail 75-year-old woman. Vincent, Serena's brother, sat utterly motionless, his face an unreadable mask of stone, but his hand beneath the tablecloth tightened into a bone-white fist. Father Antonio quietly made the sign of the cross, his aged eyes filling with pain and dismay as he witnessed the escalating cruelty playing out on the large screen. The video continued. Rosa was roughly shoved to the floor. Isla rushed in, attempting to shield her. Serena kicked Isla, struck her, and hurled heavy objects at them both. And then came the most terrifying moment. The sound of Dante's heavy footsteps approaching from the hallway. And the Serena in the video transformed instantly. In a single, chilling heartbeat, she turned from a raging devil into a terrified, helpless victim. Tears poured out, her voice trembling and broken, blaming Isla with a perfection of deceit that was absolutely chilling. The dining room sank into absolute, breathless silence. Not a sound, not a shallow gasp. Only the video running and the ugly truth laying itself bare for all to witness. Serena sat there, her face bleached white as a corpse, her eyes wide with mounting horror as she watched the incriminating spectacle of herself. Then, with a sudden, violent movement, she sprang up, shoving her chair backward with a harsh, grating screech against the polished floor. "That is fake. That is completely fake." Serena screamed, her voice shrill, frantic, and piercing. "Someone edited that video. This is a conspiracy to frame me. Dante, you have to believe me. I would never do things like that." She spun toward Dante, her eyes swimming with professional tears, reaching out as if to physically grab hold of him. But Dante did not move. He only stood there, his gray eyes colder than Arctic ice, looking at her with undisguised, profound contempt. "Fake?" Dante asked, his terrifying calmness amplifying the threat in the room. "Then why did you delete the footage from the mansion security system that very night? If you were truly innocent, you would have kept it as irrefutable evidence against Isla." Serena stammered, frantically searching for words that would not come. She turned to her father, her gaze pleading. "Father, you must believe me. This is a Moretti family plot to break our alliance." "Be quiet." Don Castellano cut her off, his voice cold, heavy, and thick with disdain. He looked at his daughter with an expression Serena had never encountered before. Not love, not protective indulgence, only utter disgust. "You have disgraced the Castellano family?" Don Castellano said slowly, his words dripping with measured anger. "You beat a defenseless 75-year-old woman. You framed an innocent employee, and you dared to think you could hide all of it from us." Serena shook her head violently, tears finally spilling down her face, but no one believed those tears anymore. They had just seen her turn them on like a switch on the screen. And then, from the other side of the long table, a weak but unmistakably clear voice rose, cutting through the silence like a knife. "It is all true." Everyone instantly turned to Rosa. The old woman sat in her wheelchair, her back straight and unwavering, her eyes bright and completely focused. For the first time since the stroke, she spoke a full, coherent sentence. "She hit me. I say protected me. It is all true." Serena looked at Rosa, then at Dante, then back at her father. In that moment, she realized there was no exit, no possible retreat. The perfect, polished mask she had worn for so many years shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. And with absolutely nothing left to lose, her true, volatile nature erupted. You can't do this to me, Serena screamed, her voice no longer sweet or refined, but wild, edged with desperation and incipient madness. You can't. The alliance between our two families. Father will not allow it. I told you to be quiet, Don Castellano roared, slamming his hand onto the table. You no longer have the right to speak in the name of the Castellano family. Serena stood there trembling, her eyes bloodshot, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. She searched the room, desperately looking for an ally, someone, anyone, to stand on her side, but there was no one. Even her brother turned his face away, as if he could no longer bear the sight of her. Dante walked toward Serena, each step heavy and deliberate, like the beat of a fatal drum. He stopped directly in front of her and looked down with the kind of expression she had only ever seen him reserve for sworn enemies. The engagement ends here, Dante stated, his voice cold as a granite slab. You will leave Chicago tonight. If I ever see your face or hear your name again, I will not be this polite. Serena stumbled back one step, then another. Her eyes darted frantically around the room like a cornered animal with nowhere left to run. Then her gaze fixed on Rosa. The old woman sat there, frail, silent, and unguarded. The one who had made everything collapse. The one who had refused to sign those papers. The one who had destroyed Serena's glittering future. What happened next moved so swiftly, so savagely, that no one could react fast enough. Serena snatched the heavy silver steak knife from the dinner table and lunged straight at Rosa with a crazed, high-pitched scream. If I can't have this family, no one will. Serena had lost everything, and now she was ready for murder. But Dante was faster. The instincts of a mafia boss, forged through decades spent navigating the violent underworld, fired in a single, lethal instant. He lunged forward and intercepted Serena before she could get anywhere near his mother. His powerful hand clamped around her wrist, twisting hard, and the silver knife clattered against the marble floor, spinning away harmlessly. Serena screamed in raw pain, but Dante did not let go. He stared down at her with the look he reserved for traitors, for the people he had ordered dealt with in Chicago's darkest alleys. You think you can lay a hand on my mother? Dante hissed through his teeth, his voice a low, lethal sound, like a snake's rattle. You think you can come into my house, beat her and walk away? Dante's personal guards appeared as if materialized from the shadows. Two massive men grabbed Serena, hoisting her away from Dante. She fought, kicked, and screamed incoherently, but she could not break their iron grip. Let me go. Let me go right now. Serena shrieked like a maniacal woman. Her carefully styled hair was now wild and disheveled. Her expensive makeup was smeared by sweat and tears. She was no longer the proud Castellano princess. She was only a frantic, raging woman being violently dragged out like a common criminal. You will regret this, Dante Moretti. Serena screamed back as they hauled her out of the dining room. I will destroy everything you love. I will make you pay. Do you hear me? You will regret it. Her screams echoed down the long hallway, then faded into strained silence, and finally vanished completely as the mansion doors closed with a heavy thud. The dining room sank into a devastating, profound silence. Don Castellano remained seated, utterly motionless, his face carved from stone. But Dante could see the fierce, burning humiliation in the older man's eyes. He was one of the most powerful bosses in Chicago, and his daughter had just performed a mad, disgraceful spectacle in front of witnesses he considered his peers. Slowly, Don Castellano stood up. He walked stiffly to Dante and did something no one in the room expected. He bowed his head low. I am sorry about my daughter, Don Castellano said, his voice low, heavy, and laced with genuine shame. She will be dealt with severely. I will personally make sure she never bothers your family again. As for our alliance, Dante lifted a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. Alliance? He asked, his voice cold and devoid of any human warmth. After what your family has done to my family, you still wish to talk about an alliance? Don Castellano raised his head, his sharp gaze suddenly dangerous. This was a profound, public insult. Rejecting an alliance with the Castellano family was an unmistakable declaration of war in the world of the Mafia. But Dante did not flinch. "Your daughter beat my mother," Dante continued, each word dropping like a cold, heavy stone. "She tormented a 75-year-old woman who was recovering from a near-fatal stroke. She framed an innocent person, and she just attempted to murder my mother right in front of me. Do you truly believe I will be allies with a family capable of that?" Silence reigned. Don Castellano stared hard at Dante, and in that terrifying moment, the power structure between the two men shifted entirely. Dante was no longer the cautious future son-in-law who needed the Castellano family's support. He was Dante Moretti, the undisputed boss of the Moretti family, the man who had publicly rejected and humiliated the Castellanos in front of clerical and familial witnesses. "I understand," Don Castellano said at last, his voice hardened into iron. "We have nothing further to say to each other." He turned to Vincent and signaled his son with a curt jerk of his head. Father and son walked out of the dining room, their backs ramrod straight, but their steps heavy with defeat. They had arrived as respected, honored guests. They left as men who had been utterly vanquished. Father Antonio rose, walked over to Dante, and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, my son," he said gently, his voice soft yet firm. "The truth must always be brought into the light, no matter how much it hurts to uncover it." Dante nodded, but offered no words. The old priest greeted Rosa with a blessing and quietly left the shattered dining room, leaving mother and son alone in the aftermath. Dante walked to his mother and dropped heavily to his knees beside her wheelchair. He took her thin, frail hand, and for the first time in many long years, he felt the burning sting of unshed tears in his eyes. "I am so profoundly sorry, Mother," he whispered, his voice thick with shame and guilt. "I failed to protect you. I trusted the absolute wrong person." Rosa looked at her son, her aged eyes filled with the depth of love and absolute forgiveness. She lifted her hand and stroked his cheek the way she had done when he was a frightened little boy. Then she spoke slowly, but with more clarity and strength than he had heard since the stroke. "Find her. Bring her home." Dante knew exactly who she meant. Essay. The girl he had unjustly thrown out of his home. The girl who had stood bravely and protected his mother when he, the powerful Mafia boss, could not. The girl to whom he owed an apology that could never be enough. "I will find her, Mother," Dante vowed, his voice raw with commitment. "I promise." Serena was gone, vanished like a bad memory. But could Dante repair the profound damage he had wrought? 3 long, arduous days passed since that fateful night. 3 days Dante spent putting every facet of the family and political situation back in order, ensuring Serena was sent far away under strict, inescapable supervision, and preparing for the meeting he knew would be the single hardest confrontation of his entire life. On the morning of the 4th day, Dante drove to St. Mary Nursing Home alone. No bodyguards, no escort cars, no outward sign of the power he wielded. It was just him in a simple white shirt and black slacks, walking into the old, quiet building like any ordinary, guilt-ridden man. The receptionist looked at him with curiosity, recognizing his fame but wisely asking no questions. She simply pointed toward the sunny, walled-in garden out back when he quietly asked if she knew an employee named Iase Navarro. Dante stepped into the garden where rose bushes bloomed profusely beneath the warm afternoon sun, and he saw her. Iase sat on a wooden bench with Margaret, one of the elderly residents, resting comfortably in her wheelchair beside her. She was reading aloud to the old woman, her voice gentle and warm, pausing now and then to explain a difficult passage or share a light laugh at a humorous detail in the story. Her rich black hair fell loose over her shoulders, the sunlight catching the dark strands and highlighting her smooth, honey-brown skin and bright, concentrated eyes. She looked completely peaceful. She looked beautiful, like a genuine angel momentarily resting in a garden full of flowers. Dante stood there watching from a distance, and his heart tightened, contracting with sharp, agonizing pain. He had unjustly thrown this woman out. He had refused to believe her, choosing instead the venomous snake over the faithful angel. Fiancée lifted her head suddenly, and her eyes met Dante's across the expanse of the garden. In that instant time seemed to halt its forward march. She blinked rapidly, as if unable to trust what her sight was showing her. Then she slowly stood up, pure instinct making her take a defensive step back. One step, then two. Her gaze was wary, guarded, and defensive, like a wild deer facing a skilled hunter. "Miss Fiancée," Dante said, his voice rough and uneven, strained with emotion. "I need to speak with you." Fiancée did not answer immediately. She only stood there, one hand resting protectively on the back of Margaret's wheelchair, as if ready to shield the old woman at any moment. Dante walked closer, and then he did the unimaginable. Dante Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss in all of Chicago, the man the entire underworld feared, slowly sank to his knees in front of Fiancée Navarro, right in the middle of the flowered garden path. His knees touched the dirt and gravel, his arms hung loosely at his sides, and he lifted his head to look at her, his gray eyes filled with raw pain and profound regret. "I was wrong," Dante said, each word heavy as solid stone. "I did not listen to you. I believed the person who sought to harm my mother instead of the person who protected her. I know I do not deserve forgiveness, but I still have to ask for it." Fiancée stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. She had prepared herself for many things when she saw Dante again. Anger, threats, even violence. But she had never prepared for this. Not for the sight of a terrifying mafia boss kneeling before her like a sinner seeking judgment before God. "Do you know what hurt me the most?" Fiancée finally spoke, her voice trembling faintly, but gaining strength. "It wasn't being fired. It was every night I lay awake thinking about Mrs. Rosa, terrified, not knowing whether she was safe or whether that woman was hurting her again. I lay awake, imagining every horrible thing that could happen to her. And I could do nothing because you threw me out." Dante closed his eyes, swallowing the tight, painful knot in his throat. "I know, and I cannot adequately describe how much I regret that cruelty. You have every right to hate me." He went on, opening his eyes and meeting hers with absolute sincerity. "You have every right to never forgive me. I will accept whatever you decide." Fiancée looked at the powerful man kneeling humbled in front of her. In his gray eyes, she no longer saw the cold arrogance she had encountered on the first day they met. She saw pain, genuine remorse, and something that looked dangerously close to desperation. "I do not hate you," Fiancée said after a long, profound silence. "I am simply disappointed. Your power blinded you. You looked at me, but you did not truly see. You heard my warnings, but you did not understand. You let money and social status decide who was trustworthy and who was merely dispensable." Dante did not argue. Every word cut into him like a blade of ice. But he knew she was fundamentally right. He had let his political power cloud his judgment. He had let the promise of alliances matter more than the simple, evident truth. "My mother wants to see you," Dante said, shifting the topic to the one thing he knew connected them. "She asks about you every single day. The very first complete sentence she spoke after the stroke was your name." Isla felt her eyes burn instantly with tears. Mrs. Rosa, the woman she had loved like her own mother. "Is she well?" she asked, her voice thick with immediate concern. "She is recovering, but she desperately needs you." Dante drew a deep, steadying breath. "I came here today to invite you back, not as an employee, Fiancée, as an honored guest of the Moretti family. You will have your own private suite, everything you need, and if one day you decide you want to leave, I will not attempt to stop you." Isla looked at him, then glanced toward Margaret, who was peacefully dozing in her wheelchair. The old woman was just like Rosa, vulnerable and in need of gentle care, a forgotten soul in need of rescue. But Rosa, Mrs. Moretti, was the exception. She was the singular light who had recognized Isla's intrinsic value and spirit when the world, and certainly Dante, had overlooked her. "I will come back," Isla finally stated, the words resonating with conviction. Dante's head snapped up, a raw, undeniable flicker of hope igniting his steel-gray eyes. But understand this, Isla pressed, her voice unwavering. It is not for you. It is solely for Mrs. Rosa. Dante offered a slow, deliberate nod as he straightened his imposing figure. For the first time since Isla had known him, the cold arrogance that usually defined his gaze was absent. It was replaced by something profound and startling. Not authority, not calculated control, but an expression of unadulterated, desperate gratitude. "Thank you," he uttered, the two simple syllables laden with more genuine weight and sincerity than any elaborate monologue the Don could have delivered. The most feared man in Chicago's underworld had humbled himself, kneeling before a mere caregiver, and she had granted his plea. The following day, Dante's sleek black sedan glided to a stop outside the colossal wrought iron gates of the Moretti estate. Isla stepped out, her small canvas duffel slung over one shoulder, a meager sign of her renewed commitment. She paused, tilting her head back to absorb the grandeur of the mansion she had been violently banished from less than 2 weeks prior. Her memory of leaving was soaked in misery. The sky had wept sheets of cold rain, mirroring the fragments of her own broken heart. Today, the late afternoon sun cast everything in a honeyed, luminous gold. A peculiar, unidentifiable mix of apprehension and quiet anticipation settled deep within her. The towering mahogany front doors swung inward, and Marco Vital, Dante's impeccably tailored right-hand man, emerged to greet her. He approached Isla, halting before her, and then did something entirely unprecedented. Marco inclined his head in a deep, formal bow, a gesture of profound respect usually reserved only for major dignitaries, not for a former nurse. "Welcome back, Miss Navarro," Marco stated, his voice stripped of its usual professional reserve, sounding profoundly sincere. "We owe you an apology." Isla prepared to respond, but Marco preempted her. "More specifically, I owe you an apology. I saw the truth that day, yet I did not speak loudly enough. I allowed you to be scapegoated." Isla met his gaze, offering a small, acknowledging nod. "You tried, Marco. I know you did your best." As they stepped across the threshold, Isla immediately felt the transformation of the Moretti residence. The air, once heavy, tense, and suffocating with unspoken threats, now felt remarkably lighter. Sunlight streamed unapologetically through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating every corner. Crystal vases held generous arrangements of freshly cut flowers, filling the space with subtle fragrance. Even the household staff seemed relaxed, moving through their duties with faces unburdened, as if a long-hovering, toxic shadow had finally been dispelled. Dante followed behind them, maintaining a respectful distance, utter silence his only communication. He no longer carried himself with the dismissive, predatory arrogance of a supreme master. Instead, he moved cautiously, humbly, a man earnestly attempting to navigate the difficult terrain of making genuine amends. Marco escorted Isla to Rosa's private suite. The moment the door opened, Isla saw Rosa sitting upright on the silk sheets, her gaze riveted on the doorway, radiating the intensity of someone who had been counting the seconds for days. When Rosa's eyes finally registered Isla's presence, the transformation was immediate and breathtaking. The old woman's face ignited, her eyes shining as if a match had been violently struck in deep shadow. Her lips began to tremble, and tears of sheer relief tracked down her wrinkled cheeks as she reached out both fragile hands. "My girl," Rosa whispered, her voice fractured by emotion yet overflowing with boundless maternal affection. "You came back." Isla's composure finally shattered. She rushed to the bedside, falling to her knees on the thick carpet, and immediately enveloped Rosa in a fierce embrace. The elderly woman clung to her just as tightly, refusing to let go, seemingly terrified that if she relaxed her grip for an instant, Isla might vanish once more. "I am sorry," Isla sobbed into Rosa's shoulder, warm tears staining the fine fabric of the gown. "I am so sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry I left you alone." Rosa gently shook her head, her hand moving automatically to stroke Isla's hair with the familiar, comforting rhythm of a mother calming her distressed child. No, no, not your fault. It was never your fault, dear one. In the doorway, Dante remained motionless, observing the raw, intimate scene. His usually unreadable expression was complex and ravaged, filled with profound self-recrimination and guilt. He stared at the evidence of his mistake. He had almost robbed his mother of the one person who gave her strength, nearly shattering everything precious through his own blind, fear-driven judgment. Once Rosa was settled and calm, Marco led Isla away. Her destination was not the cramped, austere quarters in the servants' wing this time. Instead, Marco guided her to a sprawling guest suite on the second floor, strategically located near Rosa's own room. It boasted huge, arched windows that provided a stunning view of the manicured gardens, a luxurious king-size bed, and an elegant ensuite bathroom. "This will be your room from now on," Marco informed her. "Mr. Moretti instructed us to ensure every necessity was provided. If you require anything further, you need only ask." Isla surveyed the opulence with a deep sense of disorientation. She was deeply uncomfortable with the lavish treatment. She was a medical professional, a caregiver, not a cherished, honored visitor. Yet, she recognized the gesture. This was Dante's tangible attempt to correct a grave wrong. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Later that evening, while unpacking her few belongings, her phone vibrated. A familiar alert indicating a text message from the same mysterious number that had reached out to her the devastating night she was wrongfully terminated. *I am glad you came back. Rosa needs you, Father Antonio. Isla stared at the screen, and the puzzle pieces snapped into place with stunning clarity. Father Antonio, the aged priest who held Rosa's absolute confidence. He had not only known the truth about Serena from the start, but had subtly offered Isla encouragement when she felt utterly abandoned. He was the silent, moral witness during Serena's downfall. A wave of warmth washed over Isla, and she offered a small, appreciative smile before sending a concise response. Thank you, Father, for everything. Later that night, having confirmed Rosa had taken her medication and was finally resting, Isla stood by her window, gazing out at the garden drenched in brilliant moonlight. A soft, steady cadence of peaceful breathing drifted from Rosa's adjacent room. It was the first truly restorative sleep Rosa had enjoyed in weeks. No agonizing nightmares, no phantom anxieties, and most importantly, no malignant presence of Serena looming over her. Perhaps, Isla murmured to the silent night, the storm is finally passing. Isla was back in the place she belonged. Yet she knew this was merely the prelude. The deep, complex journey of emotional and physical healing for both the inhabitants and the house itself had just commenced. 2 months drifted by like a serene, golden dream. The Moretti mansion, a fortress that had historically contained so much unspoken agony and so many ruthless secrets, now seemed to overflow with genuine laughter and buoyant light. Each morning, Isla rose before dawn to prepare a delicate, nourishing breakfast for Rosa before commencing their rigorous physical therapy in the sun-dappled garden. Their rehabilitation began with excruciatingly small steps, Rosa gripping Isla's hand fiercely, her legs shaking violently on the damp grass. But with painstaking consistency, day by day, Rosa's strength steadily returned. The transition was remarkable. She moved from needing Isla's complete physical support to managing the journey with the aid of a cane. Her speech, which had been reduced to fractured, barely intelligible sounds, reformed into full, coherent sentences, even if they were still delivered slowly and deliberately. Most crucially, her infectious, warm smile had entirely returned. The haunted look of fear was gone from behind her eyes. The torment of sleepless nights and horrific nightmares had ceased. Rosa was not just recovering. She was demonstrably being pulled back to vibrant life, and Isla was the undeniable architect of that salvation. Dante, too, underwent a noticeable, profound alteration. He drastically minimized his time away from the estate, delegating the majority of the family's complex operations to Marco. The formerly incessant late-night strategy sessions, covert trips, and abrupt, tense phone calls diminished rapidly. Instead, he dedicated hours to his mother, often sitting silently in her sunlit room, reading classical literature aloud to her, or simply existing as a steadfast presence by her side. Marco, with his keen managerial eye, was the first to recognize a deeper change. When Dante was present in Rosa's suite, his attention rarely remained solely on his mother. His gaze inevitably tracked Isla. The precise way she gently smoothed Rosa's hair, the patient, repetitive cadence she used to help practice articulation, the spontaneous, bright sound of her laughter when Rosa recounted an amusing memory from her past. Dante's curiosity about her became intense, almost clinical. He began to desperately want details. What novels did she stay up late reading? What were her favorite foods? What distant, private dreams played out behind her eyelids when she finally closed them? Yet, he could not bring himself to articulate these questions. He only watched, a silent observer attempting to decode a captivating mystery, a puzzle he was profoundly afraid to handle. Their actual conversations commenced as short, cautious exchanges, stiff with implied boundaries. "Do you need anything this morning? How is my mother today?" Slowly, tentatively, those exchanges lengthened, migrating to mundane, safer territories. They discussed the unpredictable Chicago weather, the progress of the garden roses, or the forgotten volumes shelved in the mansion library. Isla maintained a careful reserve, yet she was no longer defined by the cold, defensive shell she had worn upon her return. She was steadily encountering a new aspect of Dante, not the intimidating, icy tyrant of the underworld, but a man genuinely striving to evolve into a more thoughtful, better version of the figure he once was. One crisp morning, Isla was standing on the second-floor balcony, watching the world awaken, when she heard the measured approach of footsteps behind her. She turned to find Dante, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "I thought you might appreciate this," he murmured, extending one cup toward her. Isla accepted it, feeling the immediate, comforting warmth seep through the ceramic and into her palm. "Thank you." They settled side by side, perfectly silent, observing the sun as it laboriously climbed above the distant Chicago skyline, painting the gray dawn with rich, molten gold. No words were required. None were sought. It was simply 2 individuals sharing a fleeting, profound slice of tranquility in lives perpetually burdened by tumult. And in that brief, shared moment of sunrise and silence, a tiny, unnamed seed of potential had been planted within both of them, a feeling they were still too wary to acknowledge. That same afternoon, while Isla was out on a necessary errand to procure Rosa's specialized medication, the elderly woman summoned Dante to her bedside. He sat immediately, taking her hand gently, waiting for her to speak. Rosa looked at her son with the lucid, deeply knowing gaze of someone who had witnessed the full spectrum of human nature. "I see the way you look at her," Rosa stated, her voice slow, deliberate, and perfectly steady. "Do not be afraid, my son. She is worthy of your affection." Dante remained utterly silent, incapable of denial, because he recognized the undeniable truth of his mother's observation. He could no longer conceal the powerful, persistent sentiment his heart screamed whenever Isla entered his sight line. "But mother," Dante whispered, the confession tearing at him, "I hurt her. I do not know if she could ever forgive me enough to." Rosa squeezed his hand firmly. "Time will provide that answer, Dante. But you must be brave. True love demands courage, my son." Dante nodded, the action heavy with acceptance. Within him, the tiny, carefully banked ember of feeling that he had desperately attempted to smother suddenly roared into a bright, consuming flame. His feelings were rapidly deepening, evolving into something terrifyingly real. But did the ruthless Don Moretti possess the necessary courage to articulate them? Sleep refused to come that night for Dante. He paced restlessly through the massive house, his footsteps directionless, until they naturally led him to a large window overlooking the expansive grounds. Moonlight saturated the outside world, casting a shimmering, ethereal silver veil across the dew-kissed rose bushes. In that enchanting, dim light, he spotted a solitary figure seated on the cold stone bench beneath the ancient magnolia tree. Isla. His initial instinct was to retreat, to grant her the privacy he assumed she desired. but then he noticed the subtle, rhythmic tremor of her shoulders. She was weeping. Dante bypassed thought entirely. He moved swiftly, leaving the mansion and crossing the silent lawn straight to her. As he approached, Isla rapidly lifted her head, attempting to wipe the moisture from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Mr. Moretti, I apologize. I didn't realize." "Do not apologize," Dante interrupted softly, settling down beside her on the bench. His tone was gentle, stripped of authority. "You have every right to cry." Isla immediately averted her face, desperate to conceal her swollen, red-rimmed eyes, but the unstoppable tears continued to flow, betraying her struggle. "What is today?" Dante inquired again, his voice dropping to an almost reverent whisper. After a protracted silence, Isla's voice emerged, brittle and fractured. "The anniversary of my mother's death. 20 years ago today." Dante offered no immediate reply, simply waiting in the quiet dark. Isla, perhaps shielded by the heavy shadows that obscured her face, or perhaps finding an unexpected sanctuary in his steadfast silence, began to speak. "My stepfather beat my mother to death when I was 8 years old," she recounted, her tone strangely flat, detached, as if narrating a historical fact about a stranger. "I was there. I witnessed everything. I screamed and pleaded for him to stop, but he never paused. When the authorities finally arrived and she recounted her eyewitness testimony, the real betrayal began. No one believed me," she continued, drawing a sharp, trembling breath. "They said I was fabricating it. They dismissed me, saying that children are unreliable witnesses. My stepfather walked free due to insufficient evidence. It took 2 more excruciating years, and the near-fatal beating of another woman, before he was finally apprehended. Like Rosa," Dante whispered, the realization hitting him hard. No one believed her. Isla nodded, tears now freely tracing paths down her cheeks. "That is precisely why I couldn't abandon her. When I saw Serena brutalizing her, I didn't just see a patient. I saw my mother. I saw myself. An 8-year-old child unable to save the person she loved most." Isla then navigated through the painful chronology of her time in the foster care system, 7 different placements across a decade. While some families were tolerable, others treated her as less than human, subjecting her to grueling labor and frequent, physical punishment for the slightest perceived misstep. She recounted nights where the hunger was so acute it brought her close to fainting, a common punishment where food was withheld entirely. She spoke of the hidden scars on her back, marks she still concealed beneath her clothing, and the endless evenings she spent studying beneath the faint, solitary glow of a distant street lamp because the family refused to allow her to use the electricity in her small room. Dante listened without interruption, every word a shard of glass piercing his hardened exterior. She had survived a genuine, personal hell, yet somehow, she had emerged as a profoundly decent, fiercely compassionate woman, willing to sacrifice her own well-being to protect the vulnerable. When Isla's narrative finally subsided, Dante performed an act of unprecedented vulnerability. He opened himself, revealing a part of his history he kept ruthlessly guarded. "My father was assassinated when I was 20, Dante began, his voice a low, remote rumble. He was annihilated by the one person he deemed his most trusted confidant, a business partner, his best friend, a man he genuinely considered a brother. That man stabbed him in the back, literally." He lifted his gaze to the sky, where the cold, indifferent stars glittered like a million distant, silent witnesses. "I was forced to assume leadership of the family before I was emotionally prepared. I had to cultivate a persona of brutal coldness, utterly incapable of trust, because in my world, the penalty for misplaced faith is certain death." He turned his gray eyes back to Isla. "I constructed those walls around myself purely out of terror. Fear of trusting the wrong face. Fear of suffering the same betrayal my father did." His voice tightened, laced with self-contempt. "And then, I let that fear blind me so completely that I believed Serena, and rejected you." A heavy, profound silence enveloped them. 2 wounded people sitting in the shadow of the magnolia, each bearing the invisible weight of their respective histories. We both carry scars, Isla finally stated, her voice airy and delicate. But the fundamental difference lies in how we choose to bear them. Dante studied her, his deep gray eyes searching. You carry yours with hard-won dignity. I carry mine encased in towering walls. Walls, Isla countered, can always be torn down, if you genuinely want them to be. Dante offered no verbal response. Instead, he simply reached out and placed his hand over hers where it rested in her lap. Isla did not flinch, did not pull away. He took her hand fully, cradling it with a tentative, almost fragile care, as though it were the most precious, delicate object on earth. And they remained there, their fingers intimately woven together, gazing up at the vast, star-swept night. No further explanation was necessary. No more words were required. In that shared, silent communion, two fractured souls discovered a fragile, mutual comfort. Two damaged individuals began to find solace and peace within each other's presence. But the momentary peace was misleading. Danger, patient and lethal, still slithered through the darkness. 1 week following that confessional night under the magnolia tree, the fragile tranquility was violently disrupted. Isla awoke that morning realizing the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The perimeter guard presence had visibly doubled. Hulking men with faces carved hard as granite were stationed at every strategic corner, their eyes relentlessly scanning the grounds, perpetually hunting an invisible enemy. The main gate was now permanently bolted, and movement in or out of the estate required Marco's express, 24-hour authorization. Isla felt the oppressive tension coil tightly around the house. Dante, the man who had recently shown glimmers of vulnerability beneath his icy facade, had instantly reverted to a face of cold stone and eyes burning with professional worry. He held incessant, hushed meetings with Marco, punctuated by urgent, hours-long phone calls late into the night. Any conversation instantly ceased the moment Isla entered a room. She was too seasoned, too sharp to be easily dismissed. She knew a significant crisis was unfolding, and she resolved to uncover the truth. That night, finding Dante alone in his private study, Isla walked in without the courtesy of a knock. He spun instantly, a brief flare of surprise crossing his features before he aggressively masked it with professional neutrality. Isla, is something wrong? That is precisely what I should be asking you, Isla countered, her voice firm and demanding. What in God's name is happening? Why the double guard detail? Why the crushing tension? Why does everyone stare at me as if I might vanish into thin air? Dante stood silent for a long moment, then released a heavy sigh. He moved to his immense desk, picked up an iPad, and wordlessly offered it to her. Watch. Isla took the tablet, and the video feed that played made her blood run cold. It was Serena, her usually perfect blonde hair matted and wild, her eyes wide and crazed, her face gaunt and shadowed as if she hadn't slept in weeks. She was recording herself in a perpetually dark room, her voice shrieking through the speakers. Dante Moretti, you truly believe you can lock me away permanently? You think you can destroy my life and then casually live happily with that Puerto Rican whore? I will return. I will reclaim everything that belongs to me, and I will make you pay. You and that bitch. Just wait for me. The video abruptly cut out. Isla placed the iPad back onto the desk, her hands visibly trembling from shock and anger. When did she manage to escape? 3 days ago, Dante replied, his voice heavy with responsibility. The location her father had placed her in was not a secure correctional facility, merely an excessively high-end, lightly staffed suburban rehabilitation clinic. She successfully bribed one of the attendants and simply walked out. We have every available resource searching, but she has vanished. So she is loose, and she is thirsting for vengeance. Dante moved quickly, his gray eyes locking onto Isla's face, filled now with pure, protective concern. She is coming for you, Isla. Not me, not my mother. In her twisted mind, you are the one who engineered her ruin and stole her place. So she is planning to come here to the house? Isla asked, surprised by the unnerving calm in her own voice. She is coming to find you, Dante confirmed, his large hands gripping her shoulders firmly. And I swear I will not allow that to happen. I will find her before she can execute any plan. But until we do, you must exercise extreme caution. You are not to leave the estate grounds alone. You will not go anywhere without an armed escort. Isla looked up at him, then gave a decisive shake of her head. I am not running, Mr. Moretti. Not ever again. Not while Mrs. Rosa relies on me. Isla, you need to listen. She cut him off, her voice ringing with firm conviction, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. I have spent my entire life running. Running from my horrific past. Running from the constant threat of pain. Running from every single person who ever sought to harm me. She took a breath, anchoring herself. But this time, I have something undeniably precious worth staying for. Mrs. Rosa. And I will not, under any circumstance, abandon her. Dante gazed at her, and the complexity in his eyes deepened instantly. Admiration, profound respect, and that unnamed, terrifying emotion that was starting to feel dangerously like love. All right, he conceded at last, the word heavy with reluctant approval. But you must promise me. No recklessness. You absolutely do not confront her alone. Allow me to manage this threat. Isla nodded once, sealing the pact. I promise. Hours later, as Isla prepared for sleep, her phone vibrated. A chilling alert signaling a text from an unidentifiable number. She opened the message, and a cold dread seized her stomach. Asterisk, you think you won? The game is not over, Puerto Rican slut. I am coming to take back everything you stole from me. Wait for me. Asterisk. Isla stared at the screen, her grip tightening until her knuckles were white. Outside the security of the mansion walls, the vast darkness of Chicago stretched out without boundary. And somewhere within that predatory night, Serena was hiding. Serena was back, and she was undeniably hungry for blood. 2 weeks dragged by under a shroud of heightened anxiety. Despite the heavy security presence and the constant awareness that Serena's dangerous shadow still lurked outside, life within the Moretti fortress proceeded. Isla refused to allow fear to paralyze her routine. She maintained her dedicated care for Rosa daily, engaging her in laughter and rigorous practice sessions for walking and speech therapy. Rosa, nourished and strengthened by Isla's fierce devotion, recovered with astonishing rapidity. She soon dispensed with the cane entirely, spoke almost perfectly normally, and her eyes consistently sparkled with profound joy, especially whenever she saw Isla and Dante together in the room. The day marked Rosa's 76th birthday, and Dante chose to host a small, intensely private celebration in the garden. It was a deliberate departure from the lavish, impersonal affairs of previous years that involved hundreds of meaningless guests. This was simply a warm, intimate evening shared only among those she truly loved. Rosa, Isla, Marco, Father Antonio, and a few lifelong household staff members. The garden was magically transformed, adorned with hundreds of delicate, fairy lights that glittered like scattered starlight amongst the leaves, particularly under the sheltering boughs of the magnolia tree, the silent witness to the night Dante and Isla first held hands. A beautifully appointed round table was set with creamy linens, fresh white flowers, and tall candles. Soft, non-intrusive classical music drifted subtly from speakers concealed within the shrubs, weaving an atmosphere that was both romantic and deeply peaceful. Rosa sat at the head of the table, her face luminous with serene happiness. She looked from her son to Isla, noticing their proximity, and her heart swelled with pure joy. This, she realized, was the fulfillment of her deepest desire. Not influence or vast wealth, but merely the certainty of her son's profound happiness. After the dinner plates had been cleared, the birthday cake sliced, and the quiet toasts offered, Dante rose from his chair. He walked deliberately toward Isla and extended a hand toward her. Would you grant me the honor of this dance? Isla glanced up, taken aback. I don't know how to waltz. I will teach you, Dante promised, a rare, genuine smile curving the corner of his lips. For my mother. She enjoys seeing us happy. Isla shifted her gaze to Rosa, who was watching with sparkling, playful eyes, offering a clear nod of encouragement. Isla knew she could not refuse this quiet request. She placed her hand into Dante's, accepting the invitation, and he led her to the small, makeshift dance floor cleared right beneath the heavy branches of the magnolia. One of his powerful hands settled firmly at the small of her back. The other held hers, and they began to follow the gentle rhythm of the music. Initially, Isla was rigid, her steps hesitant and awkward, but Dante held her securely, guiding her with slow, steady patience. Gradually, she began to soften and yield to his lead, allowing the music and his touch to dictate her movement. Dante's embrace became a gentle invitation, letting him lead her through a careful, rhythmic dance beneath the soft, shimmering lights of the chandeliers. They moved with an astonishing, unspoken synchronization, bodies tracing the melody, as if this were a ritual performed 1,000 times in a life they hadn't yet shared. As the final, lingering notes faded, Dante drew her close, his eyes, the color of a stormy gray sea, searching hers in the dim light. "You gave my mother back her life," he murmured, his voice heavy with a profound sincerity Isla had rarely heard. "You have redefined this house. You have redefined me." Isla only managed a slight shake of her head. "I did nothing extraordinary. I simply did what was right." Dante lifted his hand, his touch surprisingly tender, to smooth a runaway strand of dark hair from her cheek. "In my world, Isla," he stated softly, "doing what is right is the most extraordinary thing of all." And there, bathed in the iridescent glow of the hanging lights, underneath the fragrant canopy of pure white magnolia blossoms, Dante Moretti closed the distance and claimed Isla Navarro's mouth. It was their first kiss, tentative, soft, yet profound, an unwritten vow sealed in silence. Isla closed her eyes and let the feeling completely carry her away. His mouth was warm, gentle, and in that incandescent moment, she forgot everything. She forgot the haunting specter of her painful past. She forgot the concrete threat of Serena. She forgot that his world and hers were separated by an ocean of status, wealth, and difference. There were only the two of them beneath the sweet magnolia tree, and a kiss that held the power to change every future they had imagined. From a hidden vantage point, Rosa observed them, the long lines of sorrow on her cheeks momentarily erased by happy tears. She pressed a hand to her fast-beating heart, a mother's profound relief washing over her. Finally, her son had found a partner worthy of his loyalty. But unnoticed by all, beyond the wrought iron fence and the deep shadow of the perimeter hedges, a figure lurked. Wild blonde hair obscured a face contorted by pure malice, eyes burning with a focused, surgical hatred. Serena Castellano lowered the phone, the digital proof of the kiss captured forever, her lips twisting into a chilling, venomous smile. "All right," she hissed into the suffocating darkness. "Enjoy this moment, because this will be the very last time either of you know what happiness feels like." The embrace was their beautiful beginning, but the shadows were already plotting the brutal end. The clock approached 2 in the morning. The Moretti mansion was swallowed by a heavy, almost suffocating silence. Isla was deep in a contented sleep following the celebrations of Rosa's birthday, her mouth still tingling from the lingering warmth of that unexpected kiss. Suddenly, her senses jolted her awake, not to a dream, but to an unnatural quiet, punctuated by sounds that didn't belong. A dragging footstep, a soft but heavy thud, a low, strangled noise, a groan muffled instantly, preventing a scream from escaping. Her survival instinct, honed by years of precarious living, slammed into hyper-alertness. Fear, cold and sharp, flooded her system. Isla sat upright, her heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. Something was terribly wrong. Every cell in her body screamed the warning. She slipped out of bed, careful to make no sound, cracked open her door, and stepped onto the marble hallway floor. The sight that greeted her instantly froze her blood to ice. 2 armed guards, meant to be the sleepless sentinels of this floor, lay utterly motionless. Beneath one of their heads, a dark, spreading pool of blood stained the white stone. Further down the long, ornate hallway, two looming dark shapes were advancing swiftly and silently toward Rosa's private suite. Isla didn't pause to think or rationalize. Drawing the deepest breath she could, she released a cry with the full, desperate power of her lungs. "Intruders! Sound the alarm!" Her voice, sharp as shattering glass, tore through the late-night stillness of the estate. The two attackers instantly spun around. In the sliver of moonlight filtering through a high-arched window, Isla could make out their outlines. Two unfamiliar men, faces obscured by dark cloth, long knives glinting menacingly in their hands. They didn't hesitate. They abandoned their target and charged directly at her. But Isla did not retreat. She ran the opposite direction, sprinting toward Rosa's door, throwing her own body squarely in front of it. "If you want to get in," she gasped, bracing herself, "you will have to step over my corpse first." The first assailant lunged. His knife held high in a killing arc. Isla instinctively swung her arm, grasping the heavy, ornate brass lamp base that sat on the nearby console table. She brought it up in a desperate arc and slammed the dense metal into his shoulder. He recoiled with a grunt of pain, but the second man was already flanking her. Isla whirled, raising the lamp base again to block, but she was moments too late. The cold steel of the blade ripped across her forearm, and blood burst forth, hot, shocking, and instantly staining the marble. She clamped her jaw shut, welcoming the blinding pain, refusing to let go of her improvised weapon. She could not fall. Not when Mrs. Rosa was just a few feet behind that thick mahogany door. "Isla!" The sound was Dante's roar, tearing down the hallway like a physical force. He materialized at the end of the corridor, a storm of fury and terror, eyes savage, a heavy-caliber handgun already leveled. Marco and 5 more armed security men were right on his heels. The attackers, momentarily stunned by the sudden overwhelming threat, turned to face the reinforcements, but their time had run out. Dante fired. The bullet ripped through the shoulder of the leading assailant, who crumpled to the floor with a raw, guttural scream. The other man was instantly slammed to the ground by Marco, his arm wrenched excruciatingly behind his back, his face grinding against the stone. But Dante had no eyes for the downed men. He sprinted toward Isla, who was braced precariously against the wall, blood pulsing from the deep wound in her arm, spilling a crimson river onto the pristine marble tile. Her face was bleached bone white, yet she remained upright, still clutching the brass lamp base, still forming a human shield for his mother's room. "No! Isla, no!" Dante's controlled demeanor shattered. He dropped recklessly to his knees, wrapping his arms around her, his face ashen, frozen in shock and disbelief. "Get a doctor! Now! Someone call an ambulance! Damn it!" he shouted, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. It was the first time anyone in the Moretti organization had witnessed their feared boss lose all pretense of control. Dante Moretti, the cold man whose hand never trembled when ordering an execution, was now shaking violently as he held this fragile young woman. His eyes red-rimmed, his voice thick with visceral anguish. Don't you dare leave me. Do you hear me? Don't you dare die." Isla managed to lift her uninjured hand, her fingertips brushing his stubbled cheek. "I'm fine," she whispered, forcing a fragile smile through the throbbing agony. "It's truly just a scratch. Is Mrs. Rosa safe? Please, tell me she's safe." Dante stared at her, speechless, unable to process the question. She had just been slashed. Her lifeblood was soaking his expensive shirt, and her sole concern was still his mother. "Rosa is safe," Marco confirmed urgently from behind them. "She's still in her room, locked and unharmed." Isla exhaled a long, shuddering breath of relief, as if the searing wound in her arm instantly mattered less. Dante hauled her closer, his forehead pressing desperately against hers. "You almost sacrificed your life protecting my mother again. Are you completely insane?" "Maybe," Isla admitted, her voice weakening rapidly. "But I promised I wouldn't abandon her. Remember?" A doctor, a man accustomed to clandestine operations, arrived within 15 minutes, quickly assessing and treating Isla's injury. Fortunately, the blade had missed major arteries. The cut was superficial but required several precise stitches. While Isla was being stabilized, Marco dealt with the prisoners. Under pressure, they cracked quickly. Serena Castellano hired us. One confessed, his face contorted from pain and fear. She paid $50,000, a bonus if we killed both the old woman and the Puerto Rican girl. She's hiding out in a derelict apartment down by the harbor. Dante, who had been hovering over Isla, slowly rose. The cold, impenetrable mask of the Mafia boss snapped back into place. But beneath the steely gray eyes, a hellish, cleansing fury burned white-hot. He knelt once more by Isla's bedside, gently kissing her forehead where a feverish sheen was beginning to appear. "Rest now," he commanded, his voice deep and controlled. "I will be back." He then turned to Marco, his voice slicing like Arctic ice. "Find her, right now." Isla had faced death because of Serena. Now Dante was going hunting. The dilapidated apartment was situated within a condemned building, its grime-streaked windows overlooking the industrial stretch of the Chicago harbor. Dante didn't bother with the knob. He delivered a single, brutal kick, tearing the rotted door from its hinges, and stepped inside, Marco and 4 heavily armed guards following his lead. In the dim, foul-smelling corner of the room, Serena Castellano was huddled, crouched like a trapped, cornered animal. The lustrous golden blonde hair she had once worn like a crown was now matted, filthy, and tangled. The eyes that had once glittered with calculated malice were now feral, wide with madness and fear, and her expensive designer dress was reduced to wrinkled, stained scraps of fabric. When she recognized Dante, she sprang up, pressing herself frantically against the moldy wall, clawing at the empty air like a person completely unhinged. You destroyed everything," Serena shrieked, her voice thin and splintering. "I was meant to be the queen of this family. I was meant to have it all. But you took it away from me because of that pathetic Puerto Rican maid." Dante stood perfectly still, staring at the shattered woman he had once planned to marry. The rage he felt was consuming, hot, and violently justified. She had brutally abused his mother. She had commissioned the murder of the woman who saved them both. She deserved to die swiftly and brutally. In his former life, Dante would never have hesitated to execute such a traitor. But today he saw Isla's face. He remembered the comforting warmth of her brown eyes, the quiet strength of her belief in redemption, and the incremental, profound way she had been transforming him day by day. Dante drew his gun. Serena flinched violently, certain she was about to take her last breath, but the trigger remained untouched. He slowly lowered the weapon, his voice flat, cold, and utterly decisive. "You will live," he pronounced. "But you will live in a cage, and that is a punishment far worse than the death you crave." He glanced at Marco. "Call the police. Hand her over with every piece of evidence regarding the abuse and the attempted murder contracts." Serena erupted in guttural screams of protest, pleading, and threats, but no one bothered to listen. Within 20 minutes, the police arrived, cuffed her, and led her away. As the patrol car vanished into the receding darkness, Dante watched it go, and for the very first time in his life, he felt a profound certainty that he had chosen the right path. Not the path of brute force, but the path of lasting justice. 1 year passed, a quiet revolution taking place within the walls of the Moretti mansion. The estate was fundamentally and spiritually transformed. A newly polished brass sign now stood proudly at the gate, elegantly engraved with the words, "Rose's Heart Foundation." It was no longer a shadow-laden headquarters of organized crime, but the warm, vibrant home of a major charity dedicated to supporting caregivers for the elderly and empowering victims of domestic violence. Isla Navarro, now the foundation's chief executive officer, stood in the office that had once been Dante's stark, intimidating study, gazing out at the renovated gardens. She had traveled an impossible distance. From an orphaned girl dismissed into a rainy night to the strong, capable woman running an organization that provided hope and relief to hundreds annually. Rosa Moretti, thriving at 77, was fully healthy, moving without pain, speaking with crystal clarity, and dedicating most of her waking hours to volunteering at the very foundation that bore her name. She frequently shared her own story alongside Isla's, a living testament that hope survives, even in the most abysmal circumstances. And Dante, he had fulfilled his promise and permanently laid down the sword. He had handed the complete oversight of the family's remaining legitimate interests to Marco, focusing instead on the painstaking process of legalizing assets and investing exclusively in clean, ethical ventures. He was no longer the feared, cold-hearted capo. He was simply Dante Moretti, a man diligently working to become the truest, best version of himself. That spring, a small, intimate wedding ceremony took place in the heart of the mansion's garden. There were no hundreds of influential guests, no intrusive press, no display of ostentatious wealth for the elite. Only the people they genuinely loved. Fresh, delicate spring flowers adorned the setting, and gentle sunlight filtered through the wide, blooming branches of the magnolia tree. Isla walked across the soft grass, hand in hand with Rosa, who had insisted on the honor. The older woman led her to the front where Dante waited, handsome and composed in a stark white suit, his gray eyes shining with an honest, overwhelming happiness. Rosa lovingly placed Isla's hand into Dante's, then stepped back, tears of absolute joy streaming down her newly peaceful face. Dante held Isla's hand tightly, looked deeply into her beautiful eyes, and spoke his vows, his voice steady with conviction. You taught me that true strength is not derived from power, but from compassion. You taught me that trust is not a sign of weakness, but an act of profound courage. And you taught me that a man is not measured by what he owns, but by how he chooses to treat those who are weaker than he is. Isla smiled back, happy tears glistening brightly in her own eyes. And you taught me that even the most broken people can be made whole, that the past is only a shadow, not a definition of the future, and that sometimes the worst storms are the ones that carry us to the most peaceful and beautiful shores. They exchanged rings, simple bands of white gold, and when their lips met in their first kiss as husband and wife, a heartfelt wave of applause and joyful cheers swept across the garden. Rosa wept freely, Marco shamelessly wiped his eyes, and even Father Antonio had to discreetly dab away a stray tear. That evening, long after the last guests had departed, Dante and Isla stood by the massive living room window, gazing out at the garden bathed in the rich, fading light of the sunset. Their fingers were intimately woven together, her head resting lightly against his shoulder, and together they surveyed the home they had miraculously rebuilt from ashes. You too, come in for dinner. Rosa's voice, warm and bright, called from the next room. Dante and Isla shared a knowing, contented smile, and turned back toward the light, toward their life. There was no more darkness, no more necessity for secrets, no lingering fear, only love, deep forgiveness, and a family whole again. Some storms are destined to destroy, but others come only to wash away what no longer serves us, leaving behind the sacred core of what truly matters. The Moretti mansion had survived its tempest, and what remained was unwavering love, profound forgiveness, and a family brilliantly reborn from the ruins. This narrative offers us many enduring lessons about the human spirit. It is a lesson in raw courage, exemplified by standing up to protect the vulnerable, even when the price is your own safety, as Isla did. It is a lesson in redemption and the possibility of radical change, seen in Dante's willingness to recognize his brokenness and courageously repair the damage he caused. It is a lesson in fierce resilience, found in Rosa's refusal to surrender hope even during her darkest captivity. Most importantly, it is a lesson in how love and forgiveness possess the ultimate power to heal every wound and soften even the coldest of hearts. In real life, we all inevitably face our own storms. They may manifest as deep betrayals, crippling injustice, or pains that feel insurmountable. But always remember, like Isla, we retain the fundamental choice. The choice to stand firm or to fall victim. The choice to offer forgiveness or to cling bitterly to hate. The choice to evolve into a better version of ourselves or to let the past define the entire future. How did this journey affect you? Have you ever encountered a moment where you had to fiercely defend someone, fully aware of the personal cost? Or have you found the strength to forgive someone who wounded you deeply? Share your unique story in the comments below. We genuinely look forward to hearing the reflections from the depths of your heart. If this expansive story moved you, please press the like button and share this video with anyone you believe needs to hear this message of hope. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily inspiring stories of love, justice, and redemption. Wishing every viewer abundant health, a peaceful life, and enduring happiness. No matter how relentless life's challenges become, remember that after the downpour, the sky always clears, and kind people like you truly deserve the very best in return. Goodbye, and we will meet again in the next uplifting narrative.